tonight. We have so much to talk about and so much to cover, and we only have an hour to do it, but rest assured, as Gary said, we will have a Q&A at the end. You can feel free to ask questions at any point throughout the webinar, and we'll get to them as best we can. And we'll also share links at the end for how to get in contact with us after the fact. So we're going to talk to you about the bridge to medical school. And we understand that, some of you might be actually in different phases of your journey right now. A lot of you probably just started medical school this summer, maybe even just a few weeks ago, maybe some white coat ceremonies in the last couple of weeks. But we know that some of you may be, in your preclinical year or pre-medical years, and some of you might already be in medical school and hoping for some extra guidance on transitioning through, because as we know, each and every year is so different. It's almost like a brand new job each year. So my name is Jeanie Gribben. I'm the director of med school tutoring here at MedSchoolCoach. I went to med school at Mount Sinai in New York. I did my residency also in New York, a couple of blocks down at Cornell, and I now work clinically as a hospitalist. So I spend most of my time at MedSchoolCoach doing tutoring for step 1, step 2, step 3, shelf work, and also doing coaching for our students and our tutors, which is sort of the joy of my day. And I'll pass it over to Dr. Mandalia.
Yeah, hey, so I'm Dr. Mandalia. I'm South Florida born and raised. I went to University of Miami for undergrad and medical school. I did my internal medicine residency at Emory, finished my gastroenterology fellowship in Michigan. I'm currently a practicing gastroenterologist in Orlando, and I run our fellowship training program as assistant program director. I've been with MedSchoolCoach for quite a while. I'm the director of residency advising, so pretty much residency is what I live, breathe, and eat, and applications are due tomorrow. So I got a ton of people who are really excited about getting through the application process. So, today is kind of to give my perspective of the changes that I've seen with residency and what to focus on while you are in medical school as you think about your specialty. So thank you guys again for joining us, and thank you for having me.
Great. All right. So we'll speak briefly about what we're going to talk about today. So we'll talk about, transitioning to medical school, right? What is the difference between undergrad and med school, and what can you expect in these next couple of years? We'll talk about studying in medical school using resources. We'll talk about ways to balance that whole work-life thing and ideas about preventing burnout, which is so important. And we feel it's important to talk about that early on. We'll explore and understand residency. And I know some of you who, probably just started medical school, you're like, what are we doing talking about residency already? And it is important. And I think we all have a lot to learn from Dr. Mandalia in that regard. And so then we'll talk about building a competitive residency application from the moment you start medical school. Okay, so some key differences between undergrad and medical school. And there are many, as I'm sure you know, but we chose a couple to highlight so that we can sort of frame that discussion moving forward. So first things first is this idea of, being among others in a singular cohort, right? In undergrad, you were probably in, maybe biochem with some students and, gen chem with other students and physics with other students. But here, you're moving throughout the phases of medical school with one larger cohort. And obviously, medical schools are different sizes, but no matter what, that allows for building really strong relationships and networks that you'll take with you moving forward. I'm sure Dr. Mandalia agrees. I mean, I still talk to my medical school friends all the time who are now like spread across the country in all different specialties, and it's really just a wonderful lifelong network, personally and professionally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the value of that I think cannot be overstated. Getting into a little more nitty gritty, med school obviously has not only more volume to learn, but also a faster cadence, right? Especially with the shift of different medical school curricula where we're sort of shrinking that preclinical time to allow for more time for independent study, for research, and time in your clinical years. The goal is to basically learn a whole lot of volume of information in a pretty short amount of time. And so that's a big reason why we're doing this webinar now, right? To give you the tips and tricks and best practices to hit the ground running, right? You might remember from college, maybe, it might take a couple of weeks to settle into a certain course for the semester. Well, here, each course might only be a couple of weeks. And so by the time you hit week 2 or 3, and maybe you found your groove, it's like, oh, the final is next week. And so we want to allow you to basically thrive from minute one. Another important piece of medical school learning is that much of it is self directed. You might have learned about this sort of flipped classroom or self directed learning, where a lot of the learning that you're doing is actually independent. And so, rather than having booked up lectures from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., you'll probably have, a couple of lectures that you might, be required to be in person, but more than likely can watch on Zoom, watch remotely. You'll probably have a smattering of different small group sessions and maybe some longitudinal courses that you'll take throughout your time. But by and large, it's sort of up to you how you learn the content. And so understanding how you learn is something that we take very, very seriously here at MedSchoolCoach. And we sort of try and get to know our students so that we can optimize the way in which they learn. And we'll talk more about this when we get to resources. And then lastly, I think it's really important to emphasize the longitudinal learning, and we'll talk about that more throughout the evening. When you were in college and you took your final exam of, let's say, physics two, it was like, great, moving on from physics, and I can, basically sort of shut the chapter on this and sort of move on. That's of course not the case in medical school. And I think we all understand, the gravity of what we're learning. It's building the foundation for everything we're going to need to take care of patients. And so, especially in the start of medical school, when you're in sort of basic science courses, it might feel pretty disconnected from patients, but you'd be surprised. Like there's a whole lot of talk about, pathophysiologic mechanisms and, pharmacology, even at the clinical level. And so just I think recognizing that is something that's humbling and really important. I think it also grounds you when you start to feel, overwhelmed in medical school with the content, or sort of, you might feel like, oh, it really is a fire hydrant, as they say, of information. But I think the fact that you're really learning this all for a purpose, and this is like kind of the only chance you get, right? You learn this stuff once, and then everything beyond sort of builds on that foundation. So we said we'll talk a little bit more about resources. And so I think this question comes up a lot, the idea of, should I go to lectures in person or should I watch recordings if I'm given the option? And by and large, especially after COVID, recordings are an option. And so just sort of talking about some of these things out loud, and then and we certainly would love for you to work with us so that we together can explore sort of what is the best style for you. But some things to think about first off are time management, right? So in-person lectures provide you structure in your day. Some people really value that, the ability to sort of wake up and know, all right, I'm going to, leave my apartment at 9 and be at my course at 9:30, and sort of building your day around that. Other people like to have flexibility, and they, like to say, I know my lecture is scheduled for 9:30, but I like to work out in the morning and I'd rather watch it at 2 p.m. later today. So getting to know, are you more the person who likes to structure and schedule your own time? Or do you like this idea of having a structure and a schedule built for you? The value of watching recordings, of course, is something you can do even if you attend lecture. But the idea of content reinforcement is helpful, right? So either rewatching recordings if needed, but more so if you're watching recordings strictly, then you can sort of pause, clarify, right? You can repeat, you can go back, and that's something that's valuable for the content reinforcement in a recording. Alternatively, right, if you're watching a recording, you don't necessarily have the ability to raise your hand and ask for further clarification. So the ability to engage with the content obviously is something that's more feasible in an in-person lecture. And that sort of gets to the next point, immediate versus delayed clarification. And then importantly, thinking about structure, right? So we sort of mentioned this already, but the idea of building a consistent schedule. And so perhaps maybe certain weeks you're going to be going to lectures in person, and maybe other weeks you might, trial recordings. But I think overall, it's helpful for each course to really get a sense of, how am I going to approach this course and what is my learning going to look like? Either way, watching the lectures in person or watching the recordings is never going to be enough to really master the content. So think about watching these lectures as building the foundation, after which you'll continue your self-directed learning with other reinforcing resources. And so what are those resources? So we'll talk a little bit about third-party resources. So you might have heard of some of these, and if not, don't fret, there's a ton of them. But we'll talk about first sort of the value of them and what they're useful for, and then we'll dive into some specifics. So I think importantly, zooming out, right? Like, let's call a spade a spade. We know that we have to learn for a whole lot of reasons. First and foremost, for our future patients. We got to learn because we got to take our medical school exams, right? You have to sit for your anatomy exam, your biochem exam, your GI exam. And you also have to take boards exams, right? Standardized tests, step 1, step 2, step 3, et cetera, shelf exams. And so there's a lot of different reasons that we need to learn this content. And the idea is that lectures hopefully will address a majority of the content learning that you need. But fortunately, there are many, many third-party resources that sort of address the test-taking areas in a way that's a little bit more focused and intentional, right? And we are so fortunate at all of our medical school institutions to be learning from leaders in our field, right? You might be learning, about, you name it, about autoimmune hepatitis from like the person who founded autoimmune hepatitis himself, right? And probably shouldn't talk about GI with Dr. Mandalia on board because he's the expert. But all to say, it's really, it's really humbling and really incredible to be learning from your faculty at your medical school. That said, of course, the idea and the sort of lectures that they're teaching are not teaching sort of to the test, and maybe perhaps not emphasizing some of the things that the tests like to ask about. And so that's what these third-party resources look like. And there are many of them, right? There are question banks, video lectures, there are reference books. And so let's talk about how to sort of pepper that into your experience early on in medical school. So some of these ideas here we've shared are basically sort of supplementing your lectures, right? So if your speaker is, speaking too fast or too slow, or you feel like a certain aspect isn't explained in a very clear way, right? That's a reason to reach for another content resource, like maybe a video, right? Something that will teach you that content. Or if you're learning about, you got to memorize all the ins and outs of all the Fabry's disease. I'm just pulling diseases out of thin air, and don't worry if you've never heard of these things, you will. But you're like, I really just have to memorize these things, and maybe watching a lecture isn't the best way to memorize factoids, sort of know it or you don't facts. And so for that reason, you might reach for a reference book with tables and charts that help to organize that information. Another thing to think about is time management, right? It is obviously far more efficient to reach for a brief video rather than rewatching a whole lecture, and even more efficient to reach for a summary chart or table or a one-page reference resource about a given topic rather than continually rewatching your medical school lectures. So reinforcement is key. And then when it comes time to think about studying for the boards, whether that's, step 1, step 2, and you're coming from all across the country and different medical schools that might order things in different ways, but thinking about, what from this particular lecture is actually going to be salient for the boards, well, that's what these third-party resources do for you, right? They basically sort of comb through all the noise and sort of fish out of the way all the things that really won't end up on your boards exams and focus on the things that they tend to ask about, right? So they're really sort of geared towards your achieving your optimal performance on those tests. So I will say it once and I will say it again, these should never, ever, ever replace your lectures, right? These are reference resources and they're built for board studying, right? They're not meant to sort of provide a true, strong foundation for who you're going to be as a doctor, right? And how you're going to perform on your school exams. And so these are supplements. These are additional resources to complement your lectures. Some people like to actually start off with some reference resources to lay the groundwork before doing their school lecture. So what that might look like is if you're about to go into your hematology unit, you might reach for pathoma. And again, don't worry about the names. We'll get to that shortly. You might reach for a pathoma video to watch, a 20-minute high yield video on lymphoma before your 3 different lectures on lymphoma at school. Or conversely, you might say, I'm going to dive in. I'm going to start with my, 3 lymphoma lectures at school, but then I'm going to follow that up with my 20-minute pathoma video to really just dive in on the salient points. And so I think it's important to understand the balance of the two of them, right? It's not either or, it's understanding how do you sort of marry your lecture notes and lecture videos with these additional third-party resources. And I think when you sort of understand and grasp that interplay, that is what really allows you to develop your strongest foundational knowledge for patient care moving forward, your strongest knowledge for performance on your school exams, and your strongest performance on the boards. And so what do you use? And I will say up front, there is like an overabundance of resources. And I'm sure as I've been speaking, 3 new resources have made their way into the scene. Um, and so I will say, as is true with many things in life, usually less is more, right? But we want to teach you sort of how to think about these resources in different buckets and in different ways. So, first things first is thinking about your own learning style. Are you someone who loves videos and you can just like watch videos all day and take notes and be engaged? Or are you someone who like 5 minutes into the video, you're like, oh, I've been texting on my phone for 5 minutes, right? So sort of understanding that. Same thing goes for books, right? Some people are such sort of tactile people, really like to turn the pages of a book and see charts and annotate. And other people are like, I can't look at this block of text. This is crazy. And so getting to know yourself, and again, that's something that we really strive to help you with here at MedSchoolCoach, to sort of best understand your learning style is going to be key. And this is also something that's very different from undergrad, right? In undergrad, basically everyone was using the same textbook, the same syllabus, watching the same lectures. And here in med school, you have the opportunity to sort of independently understand what works best for you. And the sooner you do that, the better. That will just allow you to master the content much more quickly. So, how do you figure out what works for you? Well, fortunately, a lot of these resources have free trials. And I encourage you early on, even if it feels like so out of left field, even if you just like, you don't even have your white coat ceremony yet, you're like, what is this lady talking about? Take advantage of these things and just, trial a video of pathoma here and browse through first aid there. We'll get to the name shortly. Just to see sort of what is most intuitive to me. What is something that feels natural in the way that the content is being presented? Um, I think the probably the biggest thing to think about to emphasize is thinking about resources that address different areas. So there's going to be some resources that are based on content, right? Their goal is to teach you the content. We often find these in videos, right, where they're explaining things to you and teaching you, whether that's Pathoma or Boards and Beyond. And, reference books, things that have charts, right, and review tables are not really teaching that material to you, right? It's summarizing it, it's organizing it, but it's not teaching it. And so we say first and foremost is understanding what is a good content teaching learning resource for you. Then we think about practice questions, right? And practice questions is a whole other ball game and a whole different thing to think about. And it's even more salient and more important when you think about your boards practicing. But think about using questions as a way to really test your application of knowledge, right? You'll quickly learn that, I can ask you, tell me everything you know about systolic heart failure, and you can probably regurgitate at some point everything you know about systolic heart failure. Does that mean you're going to get a systolic heart failure question right? Not necessarily. And so practicing the application of that content is key. And doing that in the way that you're going to see those questions is also really helpful. And then another bucket to think about is spaced repetition. And this is a term that you might have heard of. And what it basically means is, in its simplest form, anything that you learn today on Monday will need to be accessible and retrievable on your exam day 4 weeks from now, 8 weeks from now, or on your board's exam 1 year from now, or 2 years from now. And so spaced repetition basically allows you to, in a serial manner, serial like with an S, not like the food, in a serial way, sort of review and re-review content over and over and over again. And that allows information to sort of consolidate from your working memory into your long-term memory. And as we've said, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And the spaced repetition, I think, is key to progressing through this 4-year marathon. And then think about what your school offers, right? I always say, like, I love the idea of, partnering. When I work with my students, I say, let's partner with your schools, with your advisors, right? Let's sort of understand, what do they recommend? What do you even have access to? And so don't be shy, even early on, to connect with advisors or deans at your medical school, and they can offer a ton of insight in this area as well. All right. A lot of words on this slide, and it's not meant to be overwhelming. It's just meant to be sort of a big, 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 broad overview that you can reference in your recording later. Um, and I think importantly, the idea is not to use all of these or even most of these, right? The idea is to identify some of these, and you probably only want one resource per bucket, right? So for your content bucket, maybe you'll do boards and beyond lectures. For your practice test bucket, maybe you'll do UWorld. For your spaced repetition bucket, maybe you'll do onking, right? Which is through Anki, which is a whole other ball game we could probably spend 6 hours talking about alone. Um, and so all to say, be really thoughtful. And again, less is more here. And I think what we really want to share with you is the idea of thinking about these third-party resources in the different goals that they set and the different ways that they teach you. Some additional things that our best practices are that we would share. Amboss is a wonderful resource that not only has question banks, but also these nice knowledge articles. So it's a wonderful teaching resource. It's a content resource. For those of you who are visual learners, you might have heard about Sketchy Micro or Farm, and if you haven't, you will. It's a great way to turn what is a ton of memorization heavy content into a way to sort of remember based on visual cues. And then when it comes to boards exams, and don't worry, we have lots more to talk about there, different webinars in the coming weeks and months, but UWorld tends to be the gold standard for practice questions. Just a quick plug, we actually here at MedSchoolCoach developed a free Anki deck. Anki is a flashcard resource, which like I said, takes a whole lot of hours to talk about and dive into, but suffice to say, here's a QR code. Please take advantage of it. It's entirely free to you. It's really hard to learn anatomy, and a lot of you probably are starting off with anatomy here in your med school journey. There is a ton to memorize and it's hard to do it. And so our goal is to make that experience a little bit easier for you and share with you several flashcards that we have to help make this experience even more fun and enjoyable. All right. Before we transition into the residency aspect and preparing for residency of this talk, just a couple of quick notes on sort of you and your well-being, right? Med school is hard. Med school is overwhelming. Med school, like we said, as you know, it's a ton of information and a ton of content, and it demands a lot of you. And so I think it's really important upfront and early on that we talk about things like work-life balance and burnout. And so what are some of our tips and tricks for that idea of work-life balance? Or I think the preferred term now is work-life integration, right? Because it really is an integrating experience. So time management is key, right? Building a schedule, whether that's a week by week schedule or even a day by day, hour by hour study schedule. You might hear more about study schedules when people talk about dedicated study periods for their boards exams. But I think like the best foundation to a successful day or week is having a good plan, right? And so that's something that we at MedSchoolCoach take so seriously, right? Building schedules, building plans so that you can sort of hit the ground running. In that schedule, it is essential to build in time off. So whether that's, days off or evenings off, you want to build in that buffer time for yourself because it is essential to recharge, right? You can't go at 110% 24/7. And it's so important to sort of allow you to be you, right? You're only going to be your best medical school self if you're your best self outside of medical school. Quality over quantity is also key. We work a lot with students and we hear, oh my goodness, they're coming to meet us and they're working 14 hours a day and they're not seeing any progress. And it's like, well, what's happening in those 14 hours, right? It's not like more is better, right? Sometimes less is more. Sometimes fewer hours that are more quality hours and more focused allows for more success. Minimizing distractions. We are living in 2024 and distraction is the name of the game. So just learning about yourself. Are you someone who will focus better in the library, right? Getting out of your home. For me, I'm like, if I'm working from my kitchen, I'm just going to snack all day, right? Like, do you have to go and do not disturb? Getting to know yourself and understanding like what is pulling me away from my work right now and how can I modify my environment so that I can emphasize my own success. And then communication with loved ones, right? A lot of people don't necessarily understand what medical school looks like and what the demands are. And so, maybe upfront you say, okay, I have an exam in 2 weeks. And so what that means is like I can, chat on the phone a couple of nights a week and maybe see you on the weekend, but I'm going to be pretty busy these next 2 weeks. And so don't take it personally, right? Just set those expectations because it's the type of thing, right? You don't really understand it unless you go through it. And importantly, thinking about burnout, right? And burnout, you probably heard about this. It is all over the news. It's a massive, massive tragedy in many different fields, but especially in medicine and even among medical students. And burnout is this sort of triad of emotional exhaustion and depersonalization and decreased self-efficacy. Um, and so I always like to talk with my own students about this burnout curve here, this like sort of stress curve. And the idea here is that, of course, we need some amount of pressure to engage us and motivate us, right? If you're totally demotivated and no sense of pressure, right, you're not going to perform well, right? And we're all highly motivated people, and you've worked very, very hard to get to where you are today and to be sitting on this webinar right now. And so I know that we all have some degree of self motivation and pressure that we place upon ourselves. And you need that to sort of get your performance to an optimal point, to an ideal zone. The problem is when we start to tip over this curve. And I think that happens all too commonly in students in medical school and even pre-medical school and all throughout sort of the medical career. And so the idea here is figure out sort of and optimize who you are so that you can continue to perform in this optimal zone and this ideal zone. Talk with loved ones, talk with friends and family, talk with your school, talk with us, right? Talk about these things out loud, right? Because the idea is, saying these things out loud, knowing this exists is key, right? You sort of got to name it to tame it. And I don't put this slide here, to scare you or to make you nervous. It's not to say that all of you on this webinar are going to be burnt out at some point, but just I think knowing sort of the epidemic that is burnout in medicine, it's important to talk about it early on. And I hope that your medical schools are as well. So thinking about, optimizing yourself, building a good schedule with time off, doing things that allow you to be you and do you, speaking with loved ones, and then of course identifying professional mentors, right? Like we said, whether those are people in your class, like trusted peers or professional mentors, this is a community, and that's what's so amazing about medicine. It is a vast, vast community of people who are here to support one another. All right. I will now turn it over to Dr. Mandalia for some amazing tips and tricks. I'm so excited actually to hear what you have to say, and it's so timely with big residency week right now. So take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to echo what Dr. Gribben said about burnout. And I think that's really important to really, one, make sure you figure out early on in medical school, you know, your time with family during your summers, your vacations, that stuff kind of goes away in residency and fellowship because you don't have control over your schedule. So, your schedule is pretty much decided for you during that time. So I think these 4 years, you should really make sure that you are optimizing that time and connection with your loved ones and family and whatnot, and your friends. And even when you're in the trenches of studying, I was always an independent studier, never actually liked to study with someone next to me or across from me or whatever. But in medical school, it's completely different because, again, as Dr. Gribben said, it's there's such a volume of information to try and consolidate that it was actually pretty helpful to study with one or two people that I was close to, and that I could trust. Um, and just remember, everyone is in the same boat as you. Everyone, I think, while is competitive, I think everyone has others' best interests at heart. So, always keep that in mind too. Don't let the anxieties of what someone else is doing or some opportunity you didn't get that someone else got, don't let that bog you down because there is 10 million more opportunities for you to pursue. You just have to go after it. So now I'll segue into my portion with that being said about residency. So residency has seen a lot of changes. I think as med students have become smarter and medical school has become more competitive, we're seeing that trickle down to residency as well. And some specialties are becoming more competitive than they used to. Um, but you should always be following your passions because this is ultimately your job. This is what you're going to be doing for the rest of your career, and you have to love it. If you're not loving it, you're going to burn out real quick. And I think it's never too early to start working on what specialty you want to specialize in while in medical school. So key things, start working on shadowing, start figuring out mentors to work with. Um, to be sure that this is the type of work that you want to do, the patient population you want to meet. If you if you came into medical school thinking that you love to do pediatrics and you go shadow a pediatrics and you realize you just cannot deal with the parents, you've ruled out pediatrics and now you're in this paradigm shift of what do I do with my career? I have no idea what I want to do. But that's why it's key to start figuring that stuff out early, right? To set yourself up for the residency application. Research and scholarly work. I think it's important to get involved in research. I think any scholarly work is something to note when you're applying to residency, even if it's not in your actual specialty. So, because you'll find the strength in it that you can apply to projects that you would end up applying to within your specialty. So, if you find an opportunity, you're excited about it, go for it. But if it's not the specialty you end up choosing, that's okay. But at least you've gotten skills that you may have not had before that you can apply in another research project within the specialty you decide. Um, so I'll get into this a little bit more later, but how well you do in preclinicals, how well you do in clerkships is all super important. That's one objective thing that they have along with step 2. Pass fail for step 1 used to be a number that was objective for programs to look at, but now it's not there anymore, which is okay because it's pass fail, but you just want to make sure you're working on passing the first time. And even if you don't, it's not the end of the world. But this change has placed more emphasis on how well you do in your clinical clerkships and your step 2. Okay. So will I match into residency? So yeah, it's a tough question. I don't have a crystal ball, but most of the time, yes, you will certainly match, and you have to pick the right programs, the right specialty that's right for your profile, for what you want, and have the right people supporting you from your letters and whatnot. So if you look at the match rate, look at in blue. So you can notice of all applicants, it's about 80%. In the senior category, so you're looking at USMD seniors or USDO seniors, which all of you are probably on track of, it's above 90%. That's great. That's a great rate, in my opinion. Very few will not match, and there are external reasons why we don't know why those people don't match. I can get into some anecdotes, but I don't want to bog you down with those details. But yes, you will match into residency. You just have to put in the work and set realistic expectations for your application. Something to think about is figuring out the vibe of each specialty that is out there. Someone who likes internal medicine may not like surgery, and vice versa. You have to really find the right group of people that you want to work with. So for me, like I went into GI because I enjoyed the physiology that was in internal medicine and the pathophys that was in it, but I actually really liked the people in gastroenterology. And I liked that I got to do small procedures here and there. It wasn't painstaking hours in the OR, which just wasn't for me. I'm a much better scoper than I am someone that will suture. You'd never want me to anywhere near a suture or a scalpel, but I can definitely scope. Um, Same with people who want to do cardiology, but not GI. Cardiology is heavy on physiology, and people enjoy that. People enjoy the thought processes in that. For emergency medicine, people enjoy the shift work and just being able to be in all of it in that 8-hour, 10-hour shift that's there, and then they don't have to worry about it when they get home. So it really just is dependent on what you're looking for in terms of your lifestyle, what you're looking for in the team dynamic, what you're looking for in the actual science of what you're practicing. So work-life balance, does it even exist? Yes, it does exist. You have to create it, right? There are going to be more work-intensive specialties, the ones that are surgical subspecialties, or the ones like EM where you kind of just shift working. There are more balanced specialties like family medicine and psychiatry where you have shift work, but then you also have to balance that there might be follow-up results and whatnot that you have to for your continuity patients. So, I think each specialty does enable a person or a medical student or a future resident to have that work-life balance. It's just a matter of weighing what's more important to you in whatever niche you're trying to build yourself in. Other things to think about is whether you want to be in an urban environment or a rural environment. This is actually a question they ask you in the residency application: is what is your setting preference? And they have a choice for no preference as well. But if you grew up in a small town and you've always seen yourself go back to the community there that raised you, that's totally fine. That's your happy place. That's your happiness. If you're someone that loves the hustle bustle, if you want to be in New York, like Dr. Gribben, it's great. It's awesome. It's fun. You get the best of both worlds. It's just a matter of where you see yourself fit in terms of your personality, your profile, where you are in life with a significant other, what your goals are in life, etc. So each residency does have different lengths of time. Internal, family, and pediatrics will be your shortest one, which is about 3 years total. And then things like EM and PM&R, internal medicine, or med peds rather, will have like a 4-year plan close to. And then when you start getting to your more surgical subspecialties, your general surgery specialties, your radiology, anesthesia, those tend to be longer. And then obviously neurosurgery takes the crown for the longest residency. But that's not to say that other residencies can't be longer. You could easily do internal medicine, decide to take a year of research, and then do fellowship afterwards. And you've pretty much spent the entire length of neurosurgery and training trying to become whatever you're specializing in. So it just, there is still more training if you decide that you want to do that after those 3-year specialties. So physician compensation, if this is important to you, it's something to look at. I think your primary care specialties are going to be the lowest paid, right? And then your ones that are more procedural, heavy are the ones that are either cash pay or reimbursed more highly than others. But if this is something important to you, then look for it. But I wouldn't decide a career based on compensation, because you don't want to be chasing money. That won't bring you happiness. You really need to enjoy the patient population that you're caring for. So what to focus on now? And this is a very small slide, but I'll kind of weigh in on certain things that will be important as you progress. So obviously, step 1, you want to aim to pass that exam. Students have the option to take step 2 before they take step 1, and I've started to see that happen a lot more as a result of the pass-fail change. I don't know the huge strategy behind it, because a lot of step 1 material is utilized in step 2, and there is a big, I think they work off of each other, but it is doable to do that. At the end of when you're applying to residency, your medical school will come up with something called a medical student performance evaluation. This will culminate in everything that you've done in medical school: your clerkships, your preclinical grades, any interruptions or extensions, or anything that they have to discuss or disclose to programs, they will disclose in here. They will consolidate feedback from all your clerkships that you have rotated in. So it's important that you're doing your best in all of them, because you don't want any of that to bite you. Be the best medical student every rotation that you're in. It's a high bar to achieve, but it's something to always aim for, because it adds to the MSPE. At the end, you have the option to write a paragraph for yourself, which most people will do. It's called the noteworthy characteristics, where you get to pretty much summarize 3 characteristics about yourself that really encapsulate who you are, to really showcase you. And then the school itself will also provide its own narrative, and kind of pretty much say they highly recommend you for whatever residency you're applying to. Letters of rec are equally as important. You want to make sure that whatever specialty that you decide to do, whatever rotations that you're doing, you work hard to do well with the people that you want to get letters from. It's always important to ask for a strong letter of rec. Those will take you farther than just your scores alone. There is more weight on step 2 now than there was in step 1, as I mentioned before. And programs are now starting to have a more holistic review. So they will be looking at your leadership qualities. They will be looking at the activities that you did. They're not going to pigeon box you. They may pigeon box you into who you are and who you will fit into the residency. Like if you have a lot of research, they will maybe do that. They may see you as a research person at their residency. If you're applying to internal medicine and your research is all in cardiology, they know you're going to go into cardiology and they see that, and that's okay. They might see you as that cardiologist in their program, and they love that because you'll go and match into a fellowship in cardiology, and it only makes it look great for their program. Last but not least, one thing that I'm also noticing is a perceived interest in a specialty, and I'm seeing this in my USMD seniors a lot. If you decide that you want to do, for example, I have a student right now who has cardiothoracic surgery research. He's very heavy into that. And he applied to general surgery because that's what he wanted to do. He didn't want to do cardiothoracic surgery. And he didn't match because there was a perceived interest that or there was a perception that his interest was more in cardiothoracic than it was in general surgery. So programs didn't rank him as highly. So be smart about the research that you're doing. So if you are going to do research in cardiothoracic surgery, you may want to consider doing integrated cardiothoracic if that's what you want to do. But if you want to do general surgery, make it very clear that that's what you want to do and focus on the things about the research that you've done. For example, if you do health services research or health outcomes research, focus that those are the skills that you'll bring to a general surgery residency because that's what you're interested in terms of research, not cardiothoracic itself. But yeah, so I think there's a lot more holistic review. I think there's going to be a lot of weight on letters of rec in the MSPE and sort of the activities you have bring to the table. You guys worked really hard to be at your A game to get into medical school. Don't stop your involvement there. Continue doing research, continue being involved, continue choosing service opportunities if that's what you enjoy doing. Away rotations. So this is a big question, and maybe some of you are not at that point right now to think about, but it's something to always consider. So if you decide that you want to do a certain specialty, that's a surgical subspecialty or a competitive specialty like dermatology, radiology, IR, anesthesia, EM, it never hurts to do an away at a place that you want to potentially match into. Your primary care specialties don't really need away rotations. Actually ends up weeding people out. That certainly happened to me when I did it. I went to UChicago and I did not hear from them, but that's okay, but it's really dependent on what specialty you end up deciding. Even if it's a specialty that doesn't need one and you just want to do it for the heck of it, that's also okay. It never hurts to get more experience. It never hurts to work towards getting another letter from somewhere or experience another city. It's fun. You'll enjoy it, and you might learn something about yourself that you didn't know before. All right, so that's my spiel, but keep an open mind when you're ready to commit to a specialty, go all in for it.
Great. And now, probably the moment you've all been waiting for. We ask and encourage you to share all questions in the chat with us. Really, there's no question too big or too small. And we understand that, we've covered basically the 4 years of medical school in just a couple of minutes here. So we're happy to go dive deeper into anything that we mentioned. And then, of course, please feel free to use our QR code to book a meeting with us. And we'd be happy to work with you individually. Just so
Jeanie,
you
Dr. Gribben, I have a question here ready for you, if I can read them off to you.
That would be great.
All right,
Yes.
great, thanks. Our first one is, Considering that family medicine seems to be more balanced specialty and has a shorter residency, why is that there are less and less people applying into family medicine since it's clearly leading to shortages in family doctors?
That's a good question. I think I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that a big factor is compensation. I think there's certainly where some people may feel that they didn't go to medical school, take on all this debt, and then go to a specialty that they may feel is one of the lower paying specialties. Um, and family medicine also has some of its own, um, because it's mostly outpatient. Some people don't enjoy doing the follow up, the continuity. So I think it really is more of a personality balance, as opposed, yeah, it's more about personality and what they're looking for in the career, um, more so than really anything else. But I don't have a complete clear answer on it. But if I had to give a hunch, I would say it's on those two things. I don't know if Dr. Gribben has a thought on this.
No, I agree. I mean, I think the only other thing I'd add is there's some variability, and Dr. Mandalia, you might even know more about this, but some variability in terms of different regions of the country. Our primary care doctor is more sort of internal medicine trained or family medicine trained. The beauty of family medicine is you can treat, adults and babies, and you can deliver babies, and you can do everything in between. But obviously, yes, it's more of an outpatient focused, and so you're less sort of affiliated with an inpatient team, which some people really love and works well in certain, I think, regions of the country. And other places, maybe more urban places, they're more sort of subspecialists managing each of those things.
All right, great. We have another one here. Do you think there is a dramatic difference in success between pass-fail schools and schools that still use a grading system? Is pass-fail more beneficial?
I don't think there's enough data on that. Um, Certainly, if I think it's hard. I think med schools are finding it hard to rank their students, and I think more schools are doing less and less of that. So that's why there's more of a quote unquote holistic review of the applicant, because there's schools that are just not providing quartiles, or there's one school that does it in thirds. So I don't think there's a huge difference, because I think it's going to go away by the time you guys apply for um, residency. I think the main thing to recognize is that residencies are looking for a way to standardize how they view applicants. And I think, this is going to be the next thing that I think ACGME or LCME may push medical schools to start moving towards, is less of a focus on numbers and more of a focus on a holistic type of support for their students.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that, um, I would never sort of recommend choosing a school or not choosing a school because of the way in which their grades work, because all of that is so malleable, right? There's so much change that happens at every level, in medical school and in residency, similar to, not choosing a specialty just because of, the timing or the compensation, right? Those are things that change. What doesn't change is the medicine, and what doesn't change is the medicine that you learn and the medicine that you practice. And so, um, yeah, I think I would absolutely agree. And yeah, not much to add.
And even if you're in that situation now, right? Like if you're in a school that does do a grading system as opposed to a pass fail, never hurts to open up the conversation with your advisors on their thought process, because they have the data. They know how their students do in this grading system and whatnot. Change is hard in medical school, but does occur, and it comes through advocacy. It comes through change in leadership. Do I think you're at a disadvantage if you're already in a grading system versus a pass fail? No, I really don't, because the world is your oyster right now. You kind of have a number of opportunities to follow, and I don't think grades are everything. They never were, but I think there's more of an emphasis on holistic than they were in the past.
Okay, thank you. Here a question. How do I start to figure out what residency I'm interested in before my clerkships?
Yeah. So I mentioned before shadowing. I think if there's something that you're interested in or that you've enjoyed before you started medical school, go ahead and shadow those people. It's much easier to shadow at your level than it is when you are a pre-med student. So when, as a medical student, you can just send a message to an attending and be like, hey, I'm interested. Or if you know a third or fourth year medical student, connect with them and be like, what are you doing right now? I'm kind of interested in this. How did this work? I was interested in radiation oncology in the beginning before I moved to GI. Um, and I didn't want to be the guy that matched. So I kind of started doing research that didn't match, rather, because I saw that happen to a radiation oncology applicant. So I started doing research in it. But then I did shadowing in it, and I realized it wasn't what I enjoyed. I didn't like it. So I continued the research, finished it, but I ruled it out real quick. So I think it's important to network. I think networking is really key, especially with people who are older than you in that have already gone through the tried and true path. Um, you can learn from them. You can ask them what they wish they knew, things like that. So I think it's a good idea to start early on with shadowing and work with people or connect with people that are in that process now.
I also, something to add to that, I absolutely agree, is um, thinking about there are some sort of like dichotomies you can think about. So there are obviously, surgery and surgical subspecialties that are pretty different than some of the medicine and medical subspecialties. And so sometimes people think of that as like a nice dichotomy. So like, do I want to be in an OR most of the time, or do I not want to be in an OR most of the time? And if you're sort of in the middle, then things like GI and cardiology are wonderful options because you're not necessarily in an OR most of the time, but you can be a proceduralist and have a little bit of both. And so I think first and foremost, understanding like, do I want to wear scrubs and scrub in basically every day into an operating room is a nice way to sort of think about like a branch point to start off with. Um, Another thing I'll mention is you'd be very surprised at how different clinical medicine is from that foundational content that you're learning, right? For example, I loved neurology my whole life. I was like a neuroscience focus in college. I always thought I'd go to med school, I'd be a neurologist, right? And I still love neuroscience and I love neurology. I love learning about it. I love thinking about it. And then when I did my neurology rotation, I was like, clinical neurology is a little bit different than than reading about neuro in a textbook. Similarly, right? I think we talked about pediatrics before, and I'm like, I always thought I might actually want to do pediatric neurology because I love neuroscience and I love kids. Love kids, think they're the cutest thing in the world. And I realized very, very quickly, I was like, oh, I love kids, but I do not want to be their doctor. Right. And so you can sort of have these, think about yourself and think about what you like, think about what you're interested in. But I agree with Dr. Mandalia. Sort of the earlier you get in there, the earlier you start shadowing, the more quickly you start to see, okay, how do I take all of this that I'm learning about on a textbook or in a lecture? And like, how does that actually look day to day? How do I bring that to life? And I think it's never, ever, ever too early to start that, um, because the 4 years moves quickly.
All right, fantastic. I see another question here. This looks like a great question to end our webinar here tonight because we're getting close to our time. What should medical students do to prepare for how AI will affect medicine over the next few years?
I think that's a tough question. I think we still have, so we just started using AI in colonoscopies and GI. So we are using AI where we can detect polyps while we're doing a colonoscopy. And I love it. It's great. And I use it even for training my fellows. Um, I think what you can prepare to use AI is in your research. I think AI has become so effective in being able to analyze data, and you can analyze data with AI that if you hook up with a mentor that has figured out how to capitalize on that, it's really a great opportunity to kind of answer uh, scientific questions that you have an interest in and churn out papers. So I think we're still in the early phases in medicine and in research, but I think there's just so much opportunity out there in AI, machine learning. Um, but if that's something you're interested in, you know, consider a clinical informatics pathway while you're in medical school. Um, Consider hooking up with mentors in that are focusing on AI. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents on that. But I think there's something for medical students to capitalize on. I think in terms of a research focus, you just have to find the right person, the right mentor, and the right question um, to answer.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think I agree. Research and AI. I think the possibilities are endless. When I think about sort of what I spend most of my time with in med school, which is the sort of preclinical time and preparing for exams, I think it'll be a very, very long time until AI actually starts impacting the way in which we learn. I mean, I know now I work with many students who utilize AI to sort of support their learning and make their resources even more sort of funneled down and hyper specific, which is great. I think that like the way that we study and learn now is very, very different from what we were doing several years ago. But in terms of what you're responsible for, sort of your level of understanding and what you need to know, that hasn't changed, and that's probably not going to change for a very long time. So I think of AI as a tool to enhance and augment our learning, but at the end of the day, it can't learn for us, right? And it can't take these tests for us. It can't take the boards exams for us. So I think it should be an additional tool and an additional resource, but I actually don't view it as like the resource to end all resources. Like I would be really surprised if AI knocks Sketchy and Anki and UWorld and Pathoma and all of those resources that I listed before out of business. I think it'll be an augmenting tool to those things, but not won't replace them.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're going to use AI to study, I would be careful about that because they're not writing the board exams. Um, sure, people have fed AI board questions if they've done X, they've done comparably with XYZ or whatever. But I agree that it's there to augment. I wouldn't use it as a know-all because it may leave out details that are important for a board exam or for like a medical school exam. Um, but you know, it doesn't hurt to ask. Just don't make that your sole resource.
All right, fantastic. I think that's all the questions we have time for. So I'll just pass it back to you to, if you have any closing statements.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We know we covered a lot of ground tonight, and there's so much more. We could probably dive in for a whole hour on each and every one of these slides. So please, QR code is up. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. We would love to connect with you further and share the different tutoring and advising resources that we offer. I really think, and I know we're all sort of, like we said, we are in medicine, we are go-getters, and I think there's no such thing as too early to at least start to think about these things. And we love to coach you through this. And please just let us help and allow us to help you through your journey.
Yeah, and thank you guys so much for hearing us out. Good luck on each of your respective journeys. We're here to absolutely support you in whatever you need. But yeah, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much. Have a great night.